I pulled into my parents' driveway on Christmas morning with butterflies in my stomach, watching Emma and Tyler bounce excitedly in the back seat. The house looked picture perfect, with twinkling lights wrapped around the porch columns and my mother's prized wreaths hanging on every window. Emma pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging it up as she pointed at the decorations. Tyler clutched his handmade gift for Grandma Patricia, a painted coffee mug from his art class. Everything felt normal, hopeful even. Then we walked through that front door, and within 2 hours my world shattered completely when my mother looked at my 8-year-old daughter and spoke words that would change our family forever. The morning had started beautifully. Dad opened the door with his usual booming laugh, scooping Tyler up in a bear hug while Mom bustled around the kitchen in her festive apron. The smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee filled the air, mixing with the pine scent from the towering Christmas tree in the living room. Emma hung back slightly as she always did, waiting for her turn for affection that somehow never came as naturally as it did for Tyler. My brother Marcus arrived shortly after with his wife Sarah and their twin boys Jake and Luke, both 7 years old. They burst through the door like tiny tornadoes, immediately engaging Tyler in some elaborate game involving superhero action figures. Jessica, my younger sister, showed up fashionably late with an armload of perfectly wrapped presents and her signature dramatic entrance. The gift exchange went smoothly enough. Emma received a generic doll that was clearly an afterthought, while Tyler got the expensive remote control helicopter he had been hoping for. I noticed the difference, but convinced myself I was being oversensitive. Maybe Mom just did not know what 8-year-old girls liked anymore. But then came breakfast time. Mom had set the dining room table with her finest china, the same pattern she brought out every Christmas and Easter. The adults took their usual seats while the kids were directed to the smaller tables she had set up nearby. Emma approached her designated spot, her new doll tucked under one arm, when Mom suddenly stepped in front of her. "Kids like you don't eat at this table," Mom said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "You can wait in the living room." She pushed Emma's plate away with deliberate force, the ceramic scraping against the wooden table with a harsh sound that seemed to echo forever. The room went completely silent, except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Emma just looked down at the floor, her small shoulders sagging slightly, but she did not cry. She did not protest. She did not move. I sat there frozen, my brain struggling to process what had just happened. Had I heard her correctly? Did my mother really just say what I thought she said? The coffee cup in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. That was when Tyler, my 6-year-old son, slowly pushed back his chair and stood up. His face had gone serious in a way I had never seen before, his usual playful energy replaced by something much more mature and determined. "If Emma can't eat here, then I won't either," he announced, his young voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "She's my sister, and we stick together." He walked over to Emma, took her hand gently in his, and started moving toward the living room. As they turned to leave together, I watched my parents' faces drain of all color. Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Dad's fork clattered onto his plate. The sight of my 6-year-old son displaying more moral courage than any adult in that room hit me like a physical blow. Tyler had not hesitated for even a second. He had not looked to me for guidance or approval. He had simply seen injustice and responded with the pure moral clarity that only children possess. Marcus and Sarah exchanged horrified glances across the table. Sarah's hand went to her throat in shock, while Marcus stared at Mom with an expression I had never seen before. The twins looked confused, sensing something was wrong but not understanding what. Jessica broke the silence first. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I didn't mean," Mom started, but her voice trailed off weakly. She looked around the table as if seeking support, but found only uncomfortable stares and awkward shifting. My anger began building slowly, like water heating to a boil. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not some innocent mistake. The deliberate way she had pushed that plate away, the specific words she had chosen, the complete lack of warmth in her voice when she spoke to Emma. How long had this been happening? How many subtle slights had I missed or rationalized away? I thought back to my divorce 2 years ago. Angela and I had split amicably enough, but I remembered the tight-lipped expressions on my parents' faces whenever Emma was mentioned. The way conversations seemed to shift when she entered the room. The family photos where Emma somehow always ended up slightly out of frame or positioned at the very edge. Emma had never complained, never said anything about feeling excluded. She was a resilient kid, mature beyond her 8 years, probably because she had learned early that speaking up about unfairness often made things worse rather than better. But Tyler had always been her fierce protector, even at school when older kids made comments. Now he was protecting her from his own family. The breakfast continued in the most uncomfortable silence I had ever experienced. Dad cleared his throat several times but said nothing. Marcus cut his food into tiny pieces without eating any of it. Sarah kept glancing toward the living room where the children had gone. Jessica pushed scrambled eggs around her plate while shooting angry looks at Mom. I realized I had a choice to make. I could do what I had always done, keep the peace, smooth things over, pretend this had not happened for the sake of family harmony. Or I could follow my son's example and take a stand. The decision was not really a decision at all. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate control and looked directly at my mother. Patricia, I need you to explain to me exactly what you meant by that comment. Using her first name instead of Mom got her attention immediately. Her eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been fear. Jordan, don't make a big deal out of this, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I was just trying to organize the seating arrangements. There are so many children today. Organize the seating arrangements, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. By telling an 8-year-old girl that kids like her don't eat at the table. What exactly did you mean by kids like her? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dad finally cleared his throat. Son, maybe we should discuss this privately. No, Dad. We're discussing it right now in front of everyone because everyone heard what she said. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Emma is your granddaughter. She's been coming to family dinners for 8 years. So I want to understand what suddenly makes her different from Tyler. Mom's face flushed red. Don't twist my words, Jordan. I love all my grandchildren equally. Really, I walked over to the kitchen counter where Mom's phone was charging. Then you won't mind if I look through some recent family photos. The panicked expression that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know, but I picked up the phone anyway. She had never been good with privacy settings, and her photo albums were easily accessible. What I found made my stomach turn. Photo after photo from recent family gatherings, school events, birthday parties. Every single one had been carefully edited. Emma had been cropped out of group shots. In pictures where cropping was not possible, she appeared blurred or partially hidden behind other people. Photos that included both children had been edited to show only Tyler or replaced entirely with pictures that did not include Emma at all. What the hell is this? I demanded, holding up the phone so everyone at the table could see. Marcus leaned over to look and his face went pale. Jesus, Mom, how long have you been doing this? Sarah gasped audibly. You've been editing Emma out of family pictures. Mom snatched the phone from my hands. Those are my personal photos. I can post whatever I want on my own social media. Your personal photos? I could barely control my voice. These are pictures of your grandchildren at family events. You've been systematically erasing Emma from the family record and sharing edited versions with relatives and friends. Jessica looked sick. Mom, people are going to notice. Emma's teachers, other parents at school events. What are you telling them when they ask about her? The question hung in the air like poison. Mom's silence was answer enough. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. I knew about this. Every head at the table turned toward him. Sarah stared at her husband in disbelief. "You knew," she whispered. "I saw some of the photos she posted online. I knew Emma had been at those events, but she was not in the pictures. I should have said something, but I did not want to cause family drama." "Family drama," I repeated incredulously. "You were worried about family drama while my daughter was being erased from the family." Sarah looked like she might be sick. "Marcus, how could you not tell me about this?" "Because I was being a coward," he admitted, not meeting anyone's eyes. "I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself it was not my business." Jessica buried her face in her hands. "This is so much worse than I thought." "What do you mean?" I asked. She looked up reluctantly. "There have been other incidents. At Emma's school play last spring, I heard Mom telling Mrs. Henderson that Emma was not really family, and that she was just there to support you. At Tyler's soccer game, she told the other grandparents that she only had one grandson." My phone started buzzing, a text from Angela, my ex-wife. "Emma just called me crying. What's happening over there?" I stepped away from the table to call her back. Angela answered on the first ring. "Jordan, what did your mother do to Emma?" Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "It's complicated. What did Emma tell you?" She said Grandma Patricia told her she could not eat with the family because of kids like her, and that Tyler stood up for her. She wanted to know if she did something wrong to make Grandma stop loving her. The words hit me like a physical punch. She thinks she did something wrong. She's been asking me for months why your parents treat her differently from Tyler. I've been trying to reassure her that she was imagining things, but apparently I was wrong. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of my failure as a father. While I had been trying to keep the peace and maintain family relationships, my daughter had been suffering in silence. "There's more," I said, and told Angela about the photos. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Angela." "I'm here." Her voice was ice cold now. "I'm coming over there right now." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do, and I'm bringing Derek." Derek was Angela's boyfriend, a civil rights attorney who had never much liked my family even before this incident. Having him involved would escalate things significantly, but maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had continued without me. Mom was in full defensive mode now, her voice shrill and desperate. "I never said I did not love her. I just think it's important for children to understand their place in the family structure." "Their place?" Jessica looked incredulous. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Mom said, her mask finally slipping completely, "that some children are part of the core family and others are additions. Emma will always be an addition because of her background." The room exploded into chaos. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. Sarah stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. Jessica started crying. Dad finally found his voice, but only to make things worse. "Patricia has legitimate concerns about maintaining family traditions and values," he said quietly. "What values?" I shouted. "What family traditions involve treating an 8-year-old like she's less than human?" Mom's composure cracked entirely. "She's not less than human, but she's not the same as Tyler either. Look at her, Jordan. Look at your son. Can you honestly say there's no difference?" The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone stared at her in horror, but she was not done. "I've spent 8 years trying to be accepting, trying to include her, but I cannot pretend anymore. Every time I look at that child, I see the failure of your first marriage. I see the choices you made that brought shame to this family." Shame. I could barely speak through my rage. "My daughter is a source of shame to you. Your daughter is a reminder that you chose them over us," Mom said, her voice breaking. "You chose their world over ours, and now you expect us to pretend everything is normal." In that moment, I understood that this was not really about Emma at all. This was about my mother's own insecurities, her own prejudices, her own inability to accept that her son's life had not gone according to her plan. But understanding did not make it forgivable. If anything, it made it worse. The afternoon brought a temporary lull in the tension, as we all tried to pretend normalcy for the sake of the children. Tyler and Emma played quietly in the living room, sharing his new toys and whispering to each other in the way siblings do when they sense adult conflict. The rest of us moved around each other like wounded animals, avoiding eye contact and speaking only when necessary. I had decided to stay for the larger family dinner that evening. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand how deep this problem ran. If Mom's behavior was an isolated incident, maybe it could be addressed. But if it represented something larger, I needed to know before I made decisions about my children's future relationship with their extended family. Jessica helped Mom prepare the dining room for the additional guests while maintaining an icy silence. Marcus and Sarah corralled their twins in the basement playroom, probably using the time to have the difficult conversation about what they had witnessed. Dad retreated to his study with a glass of whiskey emerging, only to add more ice to his drink. At 4 o'clock, Uncle David and Aunt Carol arrived with their adult children, Kevin and Brenda. Carol had always been the loudest voice at family gatherings, the one who dominated conversations and offered unsolicited opinions about everyone's life choices. David usually followed her lead, nodding along with whatever position she took on any given subject. Kevin, now 35, had never married and still lived with his parents. He worked at the post office and spent most of his free time playing video games and complaining about modern society. Brenda, 32, was divorced with no children and worked as a dental hygienist in the next town over. She had always been pleasant enough, but tended to echo whatever her mother said to avoid conflict. The initial greetings were normal enough. Hugs were exchanged, presents were distributed, and Carol immediately launched into her usual commentary about the weather, the traffic, and various family members who were not present. I watched carefully as she interacted with Tyler, noting the genuine warmth in her voice and the way she ruffled his hair affectionately. When Emma approached to say hello, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Carol's smile became forced, her voice took on a different tone, and her body language shifted slightly away from my daughter. "Hello, Emma," she said with exaggerated politeness, the kind adults use when they're trying too hard to appear friendly. "How is school going?" Emma answered politely, but Carol had already turned her attention elsewhere, dismissing her with the casual cruelty that adults often display toward children they consider unimportant. Dinner was served at 5:30 with the same seating arrangement as breakfast. This time, however, Emma and Tyler chose to sit together at the small table without being told. Tyler had clearly appointed himself as Emma's protector, and I felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness that my 6-year-old son had to take on such a responsibility. The conversation during dinner was stilted, with everyone carefully avoiding the obvious tension in the room. Carol dominated the discussion with stories about her neighbors and complaints about the state of the world. Kevin chimed in periodically with agreement, while Brenda nodded along silently. That was when Carol noticed Emma picking at her food and made the comment that changed everything. "Some people just don't know how to appreciate good cooking," she said loudly, looking directly at the children's table. Mongrel children often have difficulty adapting to proper family meals. They're more comfortable eating in different settings. The word mongrel hit the room like a bomb. Jessica dropped her fork with a clatter. Sarah actually gasped out loud. Marcus went rigid in his chair. Dad's face turned red, but not with anger at Carol. I started to rise from my seat, but Kevin spoke first. "Mom's absolutely right," he said with satisfaction. "Some kids just don't fit into traditional family dynamics. It's not their fault, but we shouldn't have to pretend it's not true." "Kevin," Brenda said weakly, "maybe we should not." "Should not what?" Kevin interrupted. "Should not acknowledge reality. Jordan made his choices, and now we all have to live with the consequences." The mask was completely off now. These people had been discussing my daughter, my family, my life behind my back. They had developed opinions and attitudes about Emma's place in the family structure. They had made decisions about her worth as a human being. Carol sensed she had support and pressed forward. "I'm not saying anything against the child personally, but facts are facts. She will never be the same as Tyler, no matter how much Jordan wants to pretend otherwise. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor with deliberate emphasis. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Carol, I want you to explain to me exactly what you mean by mongrel children. You know perfectly well what I mean, she replied defiantly. Mixed-race children often struggle with identity issues. They don't fit cleanly into either community. It's a documented psychological phenomenon. And you feel qualified to make that assessment about my daughter? I'm just stating facts based on observation and experience. What observation? What experience? My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay controlled. You see Emma maybe 4 times a year at family functions. When have you observed these supposed identity struggles? Kevin laughed bitterly. You really don't see it. Do you, Jordan? The way she hangs back, the way she never quite fits in with the other kids, the way she always seems to be watching and waiting instead of participating. She hangs back, I said slowly, because adults like you treat her like she doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong here, Carol said flatly. Not really. This is a family gathering, not a charity event. The room erupted. Jessica shouted at Carol to shut her mouth. Marcus told Kevin to get out of his parents' house. Sarah grabbed their twins and headed for the door, saying she would not expose her children to this kind of hatred. But I barely heard any of it because I was looking at the children's table, where Emma sat perfectly still, absorbing every word. Tyler had his arm around her shoulders, and I could see his young face struggling to process the adult cruelty he was witnessing. That was when I made a phone call that would change everything. I stepped into the hallway and dialed Mike Harrison, my best friend since high school, and the closest thing I had to a brother outside my biological family. Mike had always been straight with me, even when it was uncomfortable. Jordan, Merry Christmas, man. How's the family gathering going? Mike, I need you to be completely honest with me about something. The tone in my voice must have alerted him because his casual friendliness immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? Have you ever heard people in town talking about Emma about my family situation? There was a long pause. Jordan, why are you asking me this? Please, just tell me the truth. Another pause, then a heavy sigh. Yeah, I've heard some talk. Nothing major, just some of the older folks at church making comments. Your mom's bridge club friends, some of the guys at the hardware store. My heart sank. What kind of comments? The usual ignorant stuff. Questions about why you don't bring Tyler around more often without Emma. Comments about how different the kids look. Speculation about whether your parents are okay with the situation. And what do you tell them? I tell them to mind their own business and that Emma is a great kid. But Jordan, most people in town don't think about it one way or the other. It's just a few loudmouths who have opinions about everything. I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall. Mike, my mother just told Emma she couldn't eat at the family table because of kids like her. And my aunt just called her a mongrel. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I could hear Mike's television in the background. Are you serious? Dead serious. Jesus Christ, Jordan, what are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I can't let my kids stay in this environment. You're absolutely right. Listen, if you need somewhere to go, Sarah and I have plenty of room. The kids can hang out here as long as you need. The offer of unconditional support from a friend when my own family was failing me so completely nearly broke my composure. Thanks, Mike. I might take you up on that. When I returned to the dining room, the argument was still raging. Carol and Kevin were defending their positions while Jessica and Marcus tried to shout them down. Mom and Dad sat in stunned silence, probably realizing that their carefully maintained family facade was crumbling beyond repair. But my focus was entirely on the children's table, where Emma had finally started crying, silently tears rolling down her cheeks, while Tyler held her hand and whispered reassurances. That was the moment I realized this was not about family dysfunction or generational differences or communication problems. This was about the fundamental safety and well-being of my children, and as their father, I had only one choice. The headache that had been building behind my eyes finally forced me to step away from the chaos in the dining room. I told Tyler I would be right back and headed upstairs to Dad's study, hoping to find some aspirin in his desk drawer. Dad's study had always been his sanctuary, filled with leather-bound books, framed certificates from his accounting practice, and family photos spanning decades. The room smelled of pipe tobacco, an old paper familiar scents that had always been comforting in the past. I was rummaging through the top drawer of his desk when my fingers encountered a manila folder that had not been there before. The tab was labeled Estate Planning, Confidential, in Dad's careful handwriting. Something about the secretive nature of the folder made me pause. Dad had never been particularly private about financial matters. His will had been a standard document for years, dividing everything equally between Marcus, Jessica, and me, with provisions for grandchildren. I opened the folder. What I found inside made my blood run cold. The first document was a consultation summary from Hartwell and Associates, a law firm in the county seat. The date was from just 3 weeks ago. The subject line read, Revision of Estate Documents, Grandchildren Inheritance Limitations. I read the document with growing horror. The consultation notes detailed a meeting between my parents and attorney James Hartwell to discuss options for ensuring family assets remain within the core bloodline. The language was clinical and legal, but the intent was unmistakably clear. They wanted to restructure their wills to exclude Emma from inheritance rights while maintaining full provisions for Tyler. The rationale, as recorded in the attorney's notes, was that Emma was not a biological descendant of the family line, and therefore should not have equal claim to family assets. The notes specifically mention concern about outside influences and the need to preserve family wealth for legitimate heirs. There were multiple draft documents exploring different approaches. One option involved creating separate trusts with different qualification criteria. Another involved leaving everything to their children with specific instructions about distribution to grandchildren, allowing their children to make decisions about Emma's inclusion. The most recent draft, dated just 1 week ago, simply removed Emma entirely from any mention in the will while creating a substantial trust fund for Tyler. I sank into Dad's leather chair, the documents trembling in my hands. This was not a spontaneous reaction to this morning's events. This had been planned, researched, and carefully structured over multiple meetings with legal counsel. My phone rang. Angela. Jordan, I'm 5 minutes away. How are the kids? Angela, before you get here, there's something else you need to know. I told her about the legal documents. The silence on the other end was so complete, I thought the call had dropped. Angela. I'm here. Her voice was deadly calm. Read me the exact wording of that draft will. I read through the relevant sections, my voice breaking slightly as I detailed how systematically they had worked to erase Emma from the family's future. Forward me pictures of those documents right now, Angela said. Derek needs to see them immediately. I don't know if I should... Jordan, they're planning to legally exclude our daughter from her inheritance. This isn't family drama anymore. This is potential fraud and discrimination that affects Emma's financial future. She was right. I took photos of every document in the folder and sent them to Angela's phone. Got them, she said. Derek's reviewing them now. Jordan, this is serious. If they were planning to change their will based on Emma's race, that could constitute several different legal violations. I heard voices in the background as Derek examined the documents. He wants to know if there are any other papers in that folder. I looked through the remaining documents and found something even worse. A printed email exchange between Mom and the attorney discussing strategies for explaining the inheritance decisions to family members without creating legal liability. One email from Mom read, "We need to ensure that any changes appear to be based on family structure rather than other factors. Can the documents be worded to emphasize Emma's status as a stepchild rather than a biological grandchild?" The attorney's response was appropriately cautious. I must advise that discrimination based on racial characteristics would be legally problematic. However, differential treatment based on adoptive versus biological relationships may be defensible under certain circumstances. They're not just excluding her. I told Angela after reading the exchange. They're trying to figure out how to do it without getting sued. Forward those too. Derek wants to review everything before we get there. I photographed the email chain and sent it along. By the time I finished, I could hear car doors slamming in the driveway. When I came back downstairs, the argument in the dining room had finally died down into an uncomfortable silence. Carol and Kevin were preparing to leave, gathering their coats with wounded dignity. Carol made one final comment as she put on her jacket. This family used to stand for something meaningful. It's sad to see traditional values being abandoned for the sake of political correctness. That was when Angela walked through the front door with Derek beside her. Angela was a force of nature under normal circumstances, but seeing her daughter crying at a children's table while surrounded by hostile family members brought out a protective fury that was genuinely intimidating. Derek, tall and imposing with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to courtroom confrontations, assessed the situation with sharp intelligence. "Where are my children?" Angela asked without preamble. Emma and Tyler ran to her immediately, Emma throwing herself into her mother's arms while Tyler grabbed onto Derek's hand. The easy affection between Derek and both children was obvious and natural, highlighting by contrast the stilted interactions they had experienced with my family all day. "Derek, this is my family," I said, my voice heavy with bitter irony. "Everyone, this is Angela's boyfriend, Derek Morrison." Derek nodded politely to the room in general, but did not offer to shake hands. His attention was focused on the children. "Emma, sweetheart, are you okay?" he asked gently. "They said I'm not really family," Emma whispered, still clinging to her mother. "Well, that's their loss," Derek replied with quiet conviction. "Because you're pretty amazing, and any family that doesn't see that isn't worth your time." The simple, direct validation from Derek stood in stark contrast to the hours of explanation, justification, and excuse-making that had characterized the rest of the day. Emma looked up at him with grateful eyes. Carol, who had been preparing to leave, stopped to stare at Derek with undisguised hostility. "And who exactly are you to make judgments about our family?" Derek's smile was professionally polite and completely cold. "I'm someone who practices civil rights law and has a particular interest in cases involving discrimination against children." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carol's mouth opened and closed wordlessly while Kevin stepped closer to his mother as if to protect her. Mom finally found her voice. "This is still my house, and I won't be threatened by strangers." "Nobody's threatening anyone," Derek replied calmly. "I'm simply introducing myself and my professional background, although I do have some questions about the estate planning documents Jordan found in Robert's study." Dad went pale. "Those are private legal documents, which discuss discriminatory inheritance practices based on a child's racial characteristics." Derek continued in the same calm tone. "I'm afraid that stops being private when it potentially violates state and federal anti-discrimination laws." The room erupted again, but this time the dynamic was completely different. My family was no longer on the attack. They were on the defensive, scrambling to justify actions that suddenly seemed much more serious than family disagreements. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. "What estate planning documents?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I had taken. As he read through them, his face went from confusion to disgust to anger. "Dad, what the hell is this?" "It's a preliminary consultation," Dad said weakly. "Nothing was finalized." "Preliminary consultation about cutting Emma out of your will because she's mixed race." Marcus's voice was rising. "How is that preliminary?" Sarah, who had been trying to keep their twins occupied, stopped what she was doing to look at the documents. When she finished reading, she picked up Jake and Luke and headed for the door. "We're leaving," she announced. "I will not have my children exposed to this level of hatred and legal scheming." "Sarah, please," Mom pleaded. "Let's discuss this rationally." "Rationally?" Sarah turned back with fire in her eyes. "There's nothing rational about planning to exclude an 8-year-old from her inheritance because of her race. There's nothing rational about calling her a mongrel, There's nothing rational about any of this. She paused at the door with the twins. Marcus, you can stay and sort this out with your family if you want. But my children are not going to watch their aunt and uncle be treated like this. Marcus looked torn between his wife and his parents, but ultimately he followed Sarah out the door. I need time to process this, he said as he left. All of it. Jessica, who had been silent during this latest revelation, finally spoke up. Mom, Dad, I can't defend this anymore. I've been trying all day to find some way to rationalize your behavior, but this is just wrong. This is legally and morally wrong. Jessica, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that you've been planning to discriminate against my niece based on her race, and I understand that you've been working with a lawyer to figure out how to do it without getting in trouble. That's all I need to understand. She gathered her purse and coat. I love you both, but I can't be part of this family anymore if this is what we stand for. After Jessica left the house, felt eerily quiet. Carol and Kevin had finally departed during the latest argument. Only Mom, Dad, Angela, Derek. The children and I remained. So, Derek said conversationally, I think we need to have a serious discussion about how this situation gets resolved. Dad poured himself another whiskey with shaking hands. Mom sat heavily in her chair, looking older than I had ever seen her. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want my daughter to be treated with the same love and respect as my son, I said. I want the discriminatory estate planning stopped immediately. I want an apology, and I want a guarantee that nothing like this will ever happen again. And if we refuse, Dad asked. Derek answered, then we pursue legal remedies for the discrimination Emma has experienced, and we ensure that Emma's inheritance rights are protected through the court system. The implications hung heavy in the air. Legal action would make this situation public record. Their reputations in the community would be destroyed. Their professional relationships could be damaged. Their standing in their church and social circles would never recover. But more than that, it would mean the complete end of family relationships. Once lawyers got involved, there would be no going back. Mom started crying quietly, the tears of someone who finally understood the full consequences of choices she had been making for years. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. But it did, I replied, and now we have to figure out how to move forward. That evening, after taking the children home and putting them to bed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop screen. Angela and Derek had gone back to their place, but not before Derek had outlined several possible courses of action, ranging from private family mediation to formal legal complaints. The photos of the legal documents sat in my phone like evidence of a crime, which in many ways, they were. The systematic planning to exclude Emma from her inheritance, the calculated language designed to avoid legal liability, the casual cruelty of treating an 8-year-old like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. I thought about Emma's quiet dignity throughout the day, her refusal to cry or complain, even when adults were discussing her as if she were not in the room. I thought about Tyler's instinctive moral courage, his immediate understanding that what was happening was wrong, and his willingness to sacrifice his own comfort to protect his sister. My children had shown more character in one day than my extended family had shown in years. I opened Facebook and began to write. Today, my 8-year-old daughter was told by her grandmother that kids like her don't eat at the family table and should wait in the living room. When my 6-year-old son heard this, he stood up and said, "If Emma can't eat here, then I won't either. She's my sister, and we stick together." Then he took her hand, and they walked away together. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Once I posted this, there would be no taking it back. This would become public knowledge, part of the permanent record of our family's dysfunction. But Emma deserved better. She deserved a father who would fight for her, who would not prioritize family peace over her dignity and well-being. I continued typing. I found legal documents showing that my parents have been working with an attorney to exclude Emma from inheritance rights while maintaining full provisions for Tyler. Not because of anything she did, but because of who she is. I described the photo editing the systematic exclusion from family events, the casual racism that had been normalized and rationalized for years. I'm sharing this because my daughter needs to know that her father will stand up for her, and because other families need to understand that silence in the face of racism is complicity. I included a photo of Emma and Tyler from earlier in the year playing together in our backyard, their heads close together, as they worked on a puzzle. Two children who loved each other unconditionally, despite the adult prejudices swirling around them. I hit post before I could lose my nerve. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the post had been shared dozens of times. Comments poured in from friends, neighbors, co-workers, and people I barely knew. Teachers from Emma's school shared their own observations about her character and resilience. Parents from Tyler's soccer team expressed outrage and support. Neighbors wrote about their positive interactions with both children. But it was the private messages that really got to me. Sarah Chen, whose daughter was in Emma's class, wrote, "I've always wondered why Emma seemed so mature for her age. Now I understand. Please let her know that our family thinks she's amazing exactly as she is." Mike Harrison posted, "Jordan is one of the best fathers I know, and his kids are lucky to have him. Anyone who has a problem with this beautiful family doesn't deserve to be part of their lives." Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's third-grade teacher, shared the post with her own comment. "Emma is one of the kindest, most thoughtful students I've ever taught. Her quiet strength and empathy for others are remarkable. Any family that doesn't treasure her is missing out on something very special." But then the responses took a turn I had not expected. Several people began sharing their own stories about interactions with my parents. Mrs. Patterson, who lived down the street, wrote about a conversation she had had with my mother at the grocery store, where Mom had complained about having to deal with Emma at family events. Tom Bradley, who attended the same church as my parents, shared a story about overhearing my father tell other congregation members that I had made mistakes in my personal life, that the family was still dealing with. Jennifer Walsh, whose son played baseball with Tyler, revealed that my mother had told her that I was finally getting my life back together, now that I was divorced and could focus on raising Tyler properly. The more stories that emerged, the clearer it became that my family's attitudes toward Emma had been an open secret in our small community for years. People had noticed, but most had chosen not to say anything, assuming it was none of their business or hoping someone else would address the problem. By midnight, the post had been shared over 200 times and had generated more than 500 comments. Local news outlets had started reaching out, asking if I would be willing to discuss the situation on camera. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Have you seen your Facebook post? It's everywhere." I called her back. I know. I didn't expect it to blow up like this." "Derek thinks it's good," she said. "It creates a public record of what happened and shows that the community supports Emma. If your parents try to claim this was all a misunderstanding, there's now substantial evidence to the contrary." I'm starting to get interview requests. Don't do any interviews without talking to Derek first. But Jordan, I'm proud of you for speaking up. Emma is going to see this someday and know that her father fought for her. The next morning brought even more surprises. I woke up to find that the post had been shared nearly 1,000 times overnight. My phone was full of missed calls from news stations, magazines, and even a producer from a national morning show. But more importantly, there were messages from people in town offering concrete support. The owner of the local diner wanted to host a special breakfast for Emma and Tyler. The children's librarian had organized a book reading event specifically for Emma. The Youth Soccer League had voted to dedicate the next season to promoting inclusion and diversity. Emma's school principal called personally to let me know that they were implementing new policies to ensure that all families felt welcomed and supported at school events. They had also scheduled a special assembly about kindness and inclusion, inspired by Tyler's example of standing up for his sister. The most touching response came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Foster, an elderly woman who lived alone at the end of our street, knocked on my door that afternoon with a plate of homemade cookies and a handwritten note. "Dear Emma." The note read, "I have watched you walk to school every morning for 3 years. You always smile and wave even when you're having a difficult day. You help your little brother with his backpack and make sure he looks both ways before crossing the street. You are a wonderful big sister and a lovely young lady. I am proud to live in the same neighborhood as you." When I read the note to Emma, she cried for the first time since the Christmas morning incident. But these were different tears. Tears of relief and validation rather than hurt and confusion. "She really thinks I'm wonderful?" Emma asked. "She absolutely does, and so do a lot of other people." Tyler, not to be left out of the attention, asked if anyone had said nice things about him too. "Tons of people," I assured him. "Everyone is talking about how brave you were to stand up for Emma." He considered this seriously. "I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just trying to be a good brother. That's exactly what made it brave." That evening, as I was helping the kids with their bedtime routines, Emma asked the question I had been dreading. "Daddy, why doesn't Grandma Patricia love me as much as she loves Tyler?" I sat down on her bed and chose my words carefully. Some adults have ideas in their heads that are wrong and hurtful. Grandma Patricia has some of those wrong ideas, and they make her treat you differently. But that's not because of anything you did wrong. That's because she has a problem that she needs to fix. Can she fix it? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. But whether she fixes it or not, you need to know that you are loved exactly the way you are by lots and lots of people. Emma nodded solemnly. Like Tyler and Mommy and Derek and Mrs. Foster. Like Tyler and Mommy and Derek and Mrs. Foster and Mrs. Rodriguez and all your friends at school and all the people who read about you on the computer and thought you were amazing. That's a lot of people. It really is. As I tucked her in, Emma had one more question. "Daddy, are we still going to see Grandma and Grandpa?" "I don't know yet. That depends on whether they're willing to treat you with the love and respect you deserve." "What if they're not?" "Then we'll make our own family traditions with people who do love and respect you." She seemed satisfied with that answer. As I turned off her light, she called out softly, "Daddy, thank you for believing me." It was only then that I realized she had been trying to tell me about the differential treatment for years, in the subtle ways that children communicate when they don't have the vocabulary for complex emotions. Her reluctance to attend family gatherings, her quiet withdrawal during visits to my parents' house, her careful questions about why some people seemed more excited to see Tyler than her. I had missed the signals because I had not wanted to see them, because acknowledging them would have required me to confront uncomfortable truths about my family and my own complicity in Emma's suffering. But she had never stopped hoping that someone would finally notice and stand up for her. Now someone had. Multiple someones, actually. An entire community had rallied around my daughter, validating her worth and demonstrating that she was valued and cherished. It was not the Christmas we had planned, but it was the Christmas that changed everything. 3 days after Christmas, I received a text from my father. "We need to talk. Can you come over this afternoon without the children?" I had been expecting this contact. The community response to my Facebook post had been impossible to ignore, and several mutual acquaintances had reached out to my parents expressing their disappointment and concern. Their social standing in town had taken a significant hit, and their professional reputations were beginning to suffer. Dad's accounting firm had received several calls from clients asking about the situation. Mom's position on the church hospitality committee was being quietly questioned. Their weekly bridge game had been canceled indefinitely when 2 couples refused to participate. The consequences they had never considered were finally catching up with them. I decided to bring Derek along both for legal protection and moral support. Angela stayed home with the children, ready to provide emergency childcare if needed. When we arrived at my parents' house, I was surprised to see Marcus and Jessica's cars in the driveway. Apparently, this was going to be a full family confrontation. Mom answered the door looking haggard and defeated. She had aged years in the past 3 days, her usual careful appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who had not slept well. "Jordan," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." The living room had been rearranged for maximum seating, with additional chairs brought in from the dining room. Dad sat in his usual recliner, but his normal commanding presence was noticeably absent. Marcus and Jessica occupied the couch, both looking uncomfortable but determined. Derek and I took the remaining chairs. Nobody offered refreshments or made small talk. This was clearly going to be a business meeting, not a family gathering. Dad cleared his throat and pulled out a folder of documents. We've consulted with our attorney about the estate planning situation. And, Derek prompted when Dad hesitated. And we're prepared to revise all documents to ensure equal treatment of both grandchildren. Derek nodded. That's a good first step. What about the other issues? Mom spoke up for the first time. We owe Emma an apology, a sincere apology for the way she's been treated. Not just Emma, Marcus interjected. You owe Jordan an apology too, and Tyler, and frankly, all of us for putting us in the position of witnessing that behavior. Jessica leaned forward. I've been thinking about this for days, and I keep coming back to the same question. How long has this been going on? How long have you been treating Emma differently, and how did we all miss it? Mom's composure started to crack. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant to hurt her. But you did hurt her, I said quietly. For years. And you planned to hurt her more by excluding her from the inheritance. I was scared, Mom whispered. Scared of what? Jessica asked. Scared that I was losing my family, scared that Jordan's new life meant there was no place for us anymore, scared that those children would replace us in his heart. The admission hung in the air like a confession. This had never been about Emma's race, not really. It had been about Mom's own insecurity and fear of abandonment. So, you decided to make an 8-year-old child pay for your fears, Marcus said bluntly. I know how it sounds. Mom said, tears starting to flow. But every time I looked at her, I saw proof that Jordan had moved on from the family he grew up in. I saw evidence that we were being replaced. Dad finally found his voice. We thought if we could make it clear that Tyler was the priority, then Jordan would understand that his place was still here with us. The twisted logic was breathtaking. They had systematically mistreated my daughter in order to manipulate me into prioritizing their feelings over her well-being. Derek took notes throughout this exchange, documenting their admissions for potential future legal proceedings. What happens now? I asked. That depends, Dad said slowly, on whether you can find it in your heart to forgive us and give us a chance to make things right. Before I could respond, Derek spoke up. Forgiveness is a personal choice that Jordan and his family will make in their own time. But from a legal standpoint, there are several issues that need to be addressed immediately. He pulled out his own folder of documents. First, the discriminatory estate planning needs to be completely reversed with new documents that explicitly guarantee equal treatment. Second, we need a formal written agreement about future behavior and consequences for violations. Third, there needs to be a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing to counter the community perception that this was just a family misunderstanding. Mom looked panicked. Public acknowledgement? You made this a public issue when you treated Emma badly enough that Jordan felt compelled to defend her publicly. Now, you need to make it right. But that was when Dad started clutching his chest. Robert, Mom asked with alarm. Dad's face had gone pale and he was breathing heavily. I think I need to sit down. You are sitting down, Marcus said, moving toward him with concern. I need to... Dad's words trailed off as he slumped forward in his chair. Call 911, Derek ordered, already moving to check Dad's pulse. The next hour was a blur of paramedics' urgent medical decisions and a frantic trip to the county hospital. Dad was conscious but experiencing chest pains and shortness of breath. The doctors admitted him for observation and testing, suspecting either a mild heart attack or severe anxiety reaction. The family gathered in the hospital waiting room, an uncomfortable mix of people who had been in active conflict just hours earlier. The medical emergency had temporarily suspended our confrontation, but it had not resolved any of the underlying issues. Mom sat hunched in a plastic chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Marcus and Jessica flanked her protectively, but their body language was still tense and uncomfortable. That was when Angela arrived with the children. I had called her from the ambulance to explain what was happening, and she had made the decision to bring Emma and Tyler to the hospital, despite everything that had occurred. Kids should be with their family when their grandfather is sick, she had told me, even when that family has problems. The sight of Emma and Tyler walking hand in hand down the hospital corridor brought fresh tears to Mom's eyes. Tyler ran directly to her, climbing into her lap with the fearless affection that only young children possess. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" he asked. "We hope so, sweetheart," Mom replied, holding him close. Emma approached more cautiously, staying close to Angela but offering her own form of comfort. "I hope he feels better soon," she said quietly. Mom looked at Emma for a long moment, really looked at her perhaps for the first time in years. "Emma, can you come here, please?" Emma glanced at Angela, who nodded encouragement. She walked slowly to where Mom sat with Tyler. "I owe you an apology," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A big apology for the way I've treated you. It was wrong, and it was hurtful, and it wasn't your fault." Emma nodded solemnly. "Thank you for saying that. Do you think you could forgive me someday?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think so. But you have to promise not to be mean to me anymore." "I promise," Mom said, fresh tears flowing. "I promise to try to be the kind of grandmother you deserve." When Dad was finally allowed visitors, the whole family crowded into his small room. He looked tired but alert, connected to various monitoring devices but clearly on the mend. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Like an old fool who almost lost his family over his own stupidity," Dad replied with characteristic directness. Tyler climbed up on the hospital bed, careful not to disturb the wires. "Grandpa, you scared us." "I scared myself too, buddy, but I'm going to be fine." Emma hung back near the doorway until Dad noticed her. "Emma, sweetheart, come here." She approached the bed cautiously. "I need to tell you something very important," Dad said. "I love you exactly as much as I love Tyler. I haven't always shown it the right way, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. Really, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left proving it to you." As we left the hospital that evening, Derek pulled me aside. "This is far from over," he warned. "A medical emergency and some tearful apologies don't erase years of discriminatory behavior. You still need to protect Emma's interests legally and practically." "I know, but maybe it's a start." "Maybe. But watch carefully over the next few months. People can say anything when they're scared or emotional. What matters is whether their behavior actually changes." Derek was right, of course. This could all be temporary remorse brought on by fear and public embarrassment. Real change would take time to prove itself. But for the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of hope that my family might actually be capable of becoming the family Emma deserved. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my parents' dining room watching Emma help Mom set the table for Sunday dinner. They moved together with easy familiarity, chatting about Emma's upcoming school science fair project, while carefully arranging the good china. "Remember, the salad fork goes on the outside," Mom instructed gently. "I know, Grandma," Emma replied with the mild exasperation that only grandchildren can manage. "You taught me that last week." "Well, excuse me for wanting to make sure you learn proper table manners," Mom replied with mock indignation, ruffling Emma's hair affectionately. It was a scene I would not have believed possible 6 months ago. The transformation had not been immediate or easy. In the days following Dad's hospitalization, there had been difficult conversations, painful acknowledgments, and gradual steps toward rebuilding trust. Mom and Dad had voluntarily entered counseling, both individual therapy to address their underlying prejudices and family counseling to learn healthier communication patterns. The estate documents had been completely rewritten with Derek's oversight, ensuring not only equal treatment, but explicit protections for both children. The new will included specific language about non-discrimination and equal inheritance rights, making it legally impossible for future revisions to exclude Emma based on racial characteristics. More importantly, my parents had made genuine efforts to repair their relationships with both children. Dad had started attending Emma's soccer games and school events, cheering just as loudly for her as he did for Tyler. Mom had signed up to volunteer in Emma's classroom and had become one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the school's diversity and inclusion initiatives. The public acknowledgement Derek had demanded came in the form of a letter to the editor of our local newspaper. Mom and Dad had written a heartfelt apology for their discriminatory behavior, acknowledging the harm they had caused and committing to doing better. The letter generated significant community discussion, but most responses were positive, praising their willingness to take responsibility and change. Tyler continued to be Emma's fierce protector and advocate, but his role had evolved from crisis intervention to everyday brotherhood. He no longer needed to stand guard against adult prejudice, which allowed him to simply enjoy being a kid with his sister. The most remarkable change had been in Emma herself. The quiet wariness that had characterized her interactions with my parents was gradually replaced by genuine affection and trust. She laughed more freely, spoke up more confidently, and carried herself with the self-assurance that comes from knowing you are truly loved and valued. Angela and Derek had married in a small ceremony 3 months ago, creating the blended family that Derek had promised to help build. Derek's patient, consistent support had been crucial in helping Emma understand that she deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. His presence in our extended family had also provided ongoing accountability, ensuring that positive changes were maintained rather than abandoned once the initial crisis passed. The broader community had rallied around our family in ways that continued to surprise me. Emma had been invited to speak at the school's annual character assembly about the importance of standing up for others. Tyler had been recognized by the Youth Soccer League for his sportsmanship and courage. Our story had become a local example of how families could overcome prejudice and discrimination through honest conversation and committed change. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation had occurred in my relationship with my own children. Emma no longer questioned whether her father would protect her from injustice. Tyler had learned that moral courage is not just about dramatic moments, but about consistent daily choices to treat others with kindness and respect. As I watched Emma and Mom laugh together over some shared joke about proper napkin folding, I reflected on the lessons we had all learned. I had learned that keeping the peace is worthless if it requires sacrificing someone's dignity. That standing up to family members is not disrespectful when they are behaving disrespectfully. That children are watching our choices and learning from our actions, whether we realize it or not. Mom had learned that fear and insecurity, while understandable, are not acceptable excuses for harming others. That love requires active effort and conscious choice, not just good intentions. That grandchildren are gifts to be treasured exactly as they are not projects to be molded according to our expectations. Dad had learned that silence in the face of wrongdoing is complicity. That traditional values are only valuable if they include treating all people with dignity and respect. That being the head of a family means protecting all family members, not just the ones who are easiest to love. Marcus and Jessica had learned that family loyalty means holding family members accountable for their behavior, not enabling their worst impulses. They had become active allies in ensuring Emma felt welcomed and valued at all family gatherings. The extended family had been largely excluded from our lives. Carol and Kevin had never apologized for their behavior and had made it clear they felt unjustly attacked for expressing honest opinions. They were no longer invited to family events, a decision that had been surprisingly easy to implement and maintain. Tyler, despite his young age, had learned that doing the right thing is not always easy, but is always worthwhile. His natural moral compass had been validated and strengthened by the positive consequences of his Christmas morning stand. And Emma had learned the most important lesson of all, that she is worthy of love, respect, and protection simply because she exists. That her mixed-race heritage is something to be proud of rather than apologetic about. That family is defined by how people treat each other, not by blood relationships or shared genetics. During dinner that Sunday, Dad raised his glass of iced tea in an impromptu toast. "I want to say something to my beautiful granddaughter, Emma." He began, his voice slightly shaky with emotion. 6 months ago, I almost lost the chance to really know you because of my own foolishness and fear. I want to thank you for giving an old man the opportunity to learn how to be a better grandfather." Emma beamed at him from across the table. "You're welcome, Grandpa, but you're not that old." The table erupted in laughter, the kind of genuine, unforced joy that had been missing from our family gatherings for far too long. Later, as Angela and Derek prepared to take the children home, Emma ran back into the house to retrieve a forgotten sweater. She found me sitting alone at the kitchen table reflecting on how much had changed. "Daddy, are you sad?" she asked with concern. "No, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about how proud I am of you and Tyler. Proud of us for what? For being braver and kinder than the adults around you. For showing us what real family love looks like." She climbed into my lap, something she had not done in months. "I'm proud of you too, Daddy." "For what?" "For believing me when I said something was wrong, for standing up for me even when it was hard." We sat together in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "Daddy, do you think other kids have families like we used to have?" "Some do, unfortunately." "What should those kids do?" I thought carefully about my answer. "They should remember that they are valuable and loved even when the people around them don't show it properly. They should find adults they trust and tell them what's happening. And they should never give up hope that things can get better. Like they got better for us. Like they got better for us?" As I tucked Emma into bed that night, she asked one final question. "Daddy, what would have happened if Tyler hadn't stood up for me that day?" It was a question that had haunted me for months. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm grateful we don't have to find out." "Me too. Tyler's the best brother ever." "Yes, he is, and you're the best sister ever." "We make a good team." "You really do." As I turned off her bedroom light, I reflected on the long journey our family had traveled. From that horrible Christmas morning to this peaceful Sunday evening, we had learned that love is not automatic, that family relationships require intentional effort, and that children often possess moral clarity that adults have lost. The path forward was not always easy. There were still moments of tension, still conversations that required careful navigation, still work to be done in addressing the subtle prejudices that can linger even after dramatic change. But Emma no longer questioned her place in our family. Tyler's natural compassion had been reinforced and celebrated. My parents had demonstrated that people can change when they are willing to confront their own failures honestly. Most importantly, my children had learned that they have a father who will fight for them, advocate for them, and protect them from anyone who tries to diminish their worth. That Christmas morning had taught us all that silence, in the face of injustice, is complicity, that children deserve protection from adult prejudices, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. It had taught us that family is not defined by blood relations or shared genetics, but by how we choose to treat each other with love, respect, and dignity. And it had taught us that a 6-year-old boy standing up for his sister can change the entire trajectory of a family's future. As I close this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever witnessed discrimination against a child in your own family or community? Did you speak up, or did you stay silent to keep the peace? What would you do if you saw a child being treated unfairly because of their race, their background, or any other factor beyond their control? I hope our story inspires you to be brave enough to stand up for children who need protection, just like my son Tyler did that Christmas morning, because every child deserves to know they are valued and loved exactly as they are. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with others who might benefit from hearing it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about family courage and healing, and leave a comment below about your own experiences standing up for what's right. Thank you for listening to our journey from that painful Christmas morning to the healing and justice we found on the other side. Remember that change is possible when people are willing to face uncomfortable truths and choose love over fear. Until next time, may your family be filled with the kind of love that protects and cherishes every member exactly as they are.